Welcome to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. We are the go-to resource for leaders looking to greatly improve their communication skills. Whether it's one-on-one interactions, team settings, public speaking, or your digital communication. By improving these skills, leaders can create stronger connections and drive positive change within their organization. Each and every episode, we sit down with leaders from various fields, just like you're grabbing a cup of coffee with them. We dive into real, practical conversations. Our goal is to help you transform your communication skills so you can lead more effectively, build stronger relationships, and make a lasting impact. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's learn together. Well, how do you lead in uncertainty, especially in times of uncertainty? There are going to be moments in your leadership, for your business, for your team, for you yourself personally, where uncertainty just hits and you need to know how to keep moving forward. How do you move forward? How do you dream when everything around you seems to be shaky? Well, that's what we're diving into today on the Speak with People podcast, and really diving into what it takes to lead when the future is unclear, why transparency is more critical than ever, and how to avoid some of the communication pitfalls that can derail your progress, your team's progress. So whether you're navigating a crisis, uncertainty now, whether you just don't know what to happen, today's conversation is going to be filled with some invites to help you lead in a powerful and profound way. Today, I'm so excited about my guest. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. He's no stranger to leading through uncertainty. He's a CEO, a two-times author. Has his own amazing podcast. He's going to tell you so much more about that. Damon, thanks so much for being on the Speak with People podcast, and welcome.
Jason, I'm honored to be here, and I'm excited for our conversation today.
This is great. Well, I mean, we talked offline for quite a while, and I typically find that when there's that type of connection offline, once we press record, it's even better. So I'm so excited for this conversation. Why don't you give our listeners just a little peek into your life, your story, who you are, what you do, what's kind of got you to this place?
Great. My name is Damon Lembi. I'm the CEO of Learnit. I was born Learnit is a live learning platform, and we've upskilled over 2 million people over the past 3 decades, which is a lot. And we're hitting into our 30-year anniversary, which is, it's mind-blowing to me. Anyways, I was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. Growing up, my whole life was dedicated to sports. And around my sophomore year in high school, I thought that if I was going to play college or pro ball, I had to hone in on a sport, and it was baseball. And so I went all in on baseball, and it turned out pretty well for me. I was a high school All-American. I got drafted by the Atlanta Braves, and I really had my first big decision. Do I want to go pro or go college? And I ended up going the college route. And Jason, a lot of that was because the coach we had, Andy Lopez, was this Hall of Fame coach. And Pepperdine was a small school. It was like 25, it's about 2,500 people. But he communicated this clear vision, moonshot goal that we're going to win the College World Series. You're going to be a big part of it. So he set this vision in this dream for us. And long story short, I ended up getting hurt and leaving. But the great thing about it was, not great about getting hurt and leaving, but they won the College World Series that next year.
Oh my
And
goodness.
what that really showed me was that you can set moonshot goals and go for it. And if you're communicating clearly and you get everybody on the same team and pushing in a certain direction, you can hit these incredible goals. And so that was one of the things I learned about leadership right there. So fast forward, I ended up playing at Arizona State, a really good baseball school. I was fortunate enough to hit a home run in the College World Series. That's one of my old glory days stories. And though at 22 years old, I was excited to go to the next level and get into professional baseball, but things don't always turn out the way you want them to turn out. And I remember sitting in my hotel room in Omaha, Nebraska. This was back in 1995. I'm dating myself, waiting for my call to come in. My roommate, Jacob Cruz, his call came in early in the morning, first round pick for the Giants. I didn't get drafted. So here I was, 22 years old. My whole life was baseball. And that was my identity. So I was lost and a little depressed, and fortunately, I came from a family with a lot of different businesses, and one of them, my dad was just starting this computer training company called Learnit, and I started there as a receptionist. I did it for a couple of reasons. I wanted to work my way up, showed people that I could contribute and belonged. And two, I was just really unsure about my skills, if my what I learned playing sports carried over. So over the years, I taught classes, which was tough for me. I mean, you had to get up in front of a room and speak, and that was completely different than it was playing sports. I can do interviews left and right about baseball, but getting up in front of a bunch of professionals for the first time,
Wow.
I just had to get out of my comfort zone and do it, right?
Yep.
And so did sales. The opportunity came to become CEO probably around 2000, and I've been here ever since. And I've got a lot of great stories about failures, and talking about what I think we're going to get into today is leading during uncertain times, and
Yep.
and what I've learned about that. So, long story short, that's my story. I've got a podcast called the Learn It All podcast, which I really love, and a book called The Learn It All Leader, where I share what I learned from playing from 3 Hall of Fame baseball coaches, and hopefully some stories that people can learn from.
Wow. Well, I need to apologize right off because typically I try to read most of,
Don't
or
worry
if
about it.
not all, my guest books. And as I ordered it last week, we're in Tampa and the hurricane, I haven't received it, and so I was bummed. But it's coming. We're gonna definitely get that out to our listeners, to have. But your podcast is amazing, and would love that.
Thank you.
I'm curious about your company. Do you still do in-person training, or is it all online now?
I would say it's 85% online, virtual live instructor led training through Zoom, and about 10 to 15% is in person. You know, we used to have a 10,000 square foot place in San Francisco where we do a lot of public and private classes there and throughout the country. But we all know what happened during COVID, and we had to pivot immediately, which wasn't terribly hard for us because we've been delivering virtual instructor led training mostly on the technical side for 10 plus years.
Yeah.
But it was a really disruptive for a lot of our customers who wanted to do communication training at first, or emotional intelligence, and we really had to work with them to understand that they could get value out of it, and they would get just as much value out of it. And quite frankly, most of them actually prefer that now. They prefer the connections and the breakout rooms and the ease with doing it virtually. So, as much as I love the in person work that we do, I also think that there's just as much value doing what we do virtually.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. Are you guys more focused B2C or B2B? Are you working with teams who are then rolling out your courses to their people, or is it individuals?
Great question. We're all B2B.
Okay.
We kind of got out of the B2C market 10 years ago. It's just a challenge. We really wanted to hone in. And typically, our ideal customer, let's say, is 1,000 to 5,000 employees. They don't have L&D departments internally. So
Yep.
we're their outsourced L&D firm. And then we work with either, I don't know, somebody in talent development, HR, and we help design programs around communication, around leadership. Our focus is really on individual contributors through mid managers. That's our sweet spot, because I think mid managers more than anything need help. Um, Such a challenging position they're in. Now, we do work obviously with large enterprise customers, but in those situations, we're typically, we have our role,
Mm.
something that they don't have internal, and we kind of fit in there. So we love those customers. They've been with us a long time, but our bread and butter, I would say, and our sweet spot are these companies who are experiencing growth, and they have what I like to call a learn it culture. They have a culture of
So good.
learning,
Yep.
which is so important. I
Yep.
think whether it's uncertain times or any time, now more than ever, you need to have, from leadership down, organizations that understand how important it is to learn. And people, Jason, are always asking me, like, what's the most important skills for today and in the future? And what I like to say is it's actually learning agility, your ability to learn,
Wow.
because with AI and everything that's going on, and all how rapidly things are changing, the skills you have now, especially on the technical side, might be outdated in 6 months, but the communication, like what you focus on, I mean, that is so critical now.
Mm.
And being adaptable and creative and innovative and having empathy, those are all the skills that you need to be able to learn and then keep learning as a leader because it's going to keep evolving and changing.
Wow. I was just doing some training for Flagstar Bank, and one of their VPs
Okay.
told me that they feel like they've done really good the last 5 years with their technical skills, teaching their teams how to use the AI and the all of this, but they've laxed on the people first communication, soft skills, those empathy. And so, it's interesting. I wonder your thoughts on this. And we have a whole list of questions. I mean, I feel like you and I, we could talk for hours here on this, but with the onslaught of AI and technology, do you see people being more hungry for that one-on-one connection, or do you think that's weakening because of AI? I mean, what do you think? What do you think's doing with that, with the onslaught of all this new technology?
I think it's a great question. I think you're seeing people kind of fall into silos, but as a
Mm.
leader, you have to get out of that.
Yep.
There's a guy named Ethan Mollick who wrote a great book that talks about it. The book escapes my name right. I can't remember what the name of it is right now, but what you should be doing is looking at AI as another team member. So let's say you have 20 team members. Now you have 21 team members. But you got to figure out how to weave the technology and the people together, because I think one of the studies shows that the collaboration has actually gone down because of that. And
Mm.
you have to be really mindful and careful of that. And that's again why, whether it's your customers working with you or my customers working with us, is now more than ever learning these soft skills and keeping your people engaged is
Wow.
important. I'm a big fan for AI, by the way. I
Yeah.
think it's great, and I think it's gonna help. And if you're an organization or you're an individual listening today, saying, "Oh, I'm just gonna wait till it goes away," you're gonna get passed over. You're gonna get passed over by people who become power users in it. So it's super important to hone your communication skills, but also eh, be curious and learn these tools like Superhuman or ChatGPT or everything that's out there, because you're going to need them to be successful moving forward.
Wow. Wow. Well, I could ask you another 5 questions about that, but I got to go back to the beginning part of your story because I am also a fellow baseball lover.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I moved to Tampa
What team?
is, well, I'm born and raised in Detroit.
Okay.
So I'm a Tigers guy. I do, I do have a tendency to like the dark side though. So I do follow the Yankees. So, um, it's hard not to these days with Judge hitting, what's he at? 57?
Oh,
Uh,
he's amazing. Back in my glory days, I also was drafted by the Yankees out of junior college. It's funny, Braves and Yankees. My wife always just mentions the Yankees, but I like the Yankees. I mean, Judge is unbelievable. I'm a big I like the Yankees, so
yep.
you're okay. I thought you were going to
Okay.
say the Dodgers. Then we'd have a
Oh,
then we'd have a little bit of an issue. But
well, I mean, it's sort of hard not to. I mean, I'm not a Dodgers fan, but the other night with Shohei going
he's
6 for
unbelievable.
6, I mean, what a night.
I didn't do that in Little League.
Right. Well, one of the reasons we moved to Tampa is I'm, within a 45-minute drive of the Yankees, Phillies, Blue Jays, and Pirates spring training. Braves are only an hour 15 from me. So March is my favorite time of the year. Spring training baseball is the best.
It is. I go every year down to Scottsdale to see
Mhm.
the Giants. My buddy that I mentioned earlier, Jacob Cruz, is now the minor league hitting director. So I get to see him and get out on the field and watch these guys, and I love it. March is the best.
I love it. Well, speaking of uncertain times and how do we lead through it? I mean, especially in baseball. I mean, come June and July, most fans know if their team is gonna, keep improving or if it's like, nope, we're heading towards uncertainty. But how do leaders maintain trust, credibility? How do they keep, guiding people, especially when sometimes answers aren't clear during times of uncertainty?
Well, I think right now the period we're going through is a post-trust world. Whether it's fake news, whether it's the election coming up, the concerns about there being a recession. I think trust is the foundation to, keeping your team together and being successful. And
Wow.
so the best way to, I would say, to maintain trust and credibility right now is really three things. One is you got to be really clear and consistent with your messaging. Number two is model vulnerability as a leader,
Ooh.
show people that you don't need to have all the answers. And
Yep.
three, we talked about it already a little bit, is being transparent.
Yep.
Um, and if you do all those, then I think you're going to be able to build trust in a world that it's eroding trust. Let me give you an example of what not to do. I've got somebody that I mentor works for a rather large company, and they're SaaS company. They're not doing too well right now, but he was unfamiliar with what's going on in the organization. They keep changing things, and then all of a sudden they did layoffs, and it was really surprising to him because he had no idea how poorly they were doing. Because there just wasn't a lot of communication from leadership. And when you don't have a lot of communication from leadership, people, Jason, they start making up things in their head, and they just have no idea what's going on, whether good or bad. So that's just an example right there of how important it is to be clear, transparent with what's going on with people. And also, I think it's important for leaders to just say, hey, I don't have all the answers. So let's figure this out together sometimes.
Wow. Wow. I can't remember who said it, but people lean in when you're vulnerable or when you're transparent. I mean, they really get that sense. It's just powerful. How important is it during these times to over communicate? Or, I mean, if it doesn't have to be over communicating, but just keeping that consistent communication going.
Well, I think, again, I'm just going to keep staying on the trust. It's really important to over communicate, and be consistent with the communication. And then also for you listeners out there who are small business owners or run large teams, when I say over communicate, you also have to go through different channels. Because everybody absorbs communication differently, whether it's a one-on-one phone call, whether it's through your Slack channel, whether it's email. So you got to hit all the different channels. It's very, very important to over communicate, because if you don't, uncertainty, it breeds anxiety.
Mm.
And like I mentioned earlier, if you're not over communicating, people might go down the wrong path and really start wondering what's going on. And so it's really important to over communicate and be transparent as much as possible with what you can do. And my recommendation too is to have frequent check-ins with your direct reports.
Oh,
Either one-on-one, let's say every other week. And when you have these check-ins, I mean, Jason, what I like to do is just call somebody up on Teams. I make it a habit to at least check in with people, like 5 or 10. Learn's got about 50 employees, but I'll go on walks out here in Sausalito, and I'll just have a quota for 5 people a week that I'll just call them on my cell, and I'll just talk to them. And
wow.
leaders, it shouldn't just be about work. You got to, you don't have to go too deep into it, but you want to find out how are they doing? What's going on in their lives, right? And I think people really, really appreciate that. And if you want people to trust you, it starts with them being able. It starts with you being trustworthy. And
Wow.
one of the best ways of being trustworthy are having these frequent check-ins in little small groups or individually. And I just think it's really important. And I've had a couple of people tell me, especially during the COVID times, like, "Hey, Damon, it just really meant a lot to me that you would call me up, and the first 5 or 10 minutes was just about how's my family doing, what's going on with my kids." It just makes people feel more appreciated. Last thing I want to say about that though is you have to be genuine with how you do it, right?
Yep.
And you can't ask questions. It's the worst where somebody calls you up, and you're on Teams or Zoom. They ask you how you're doing, how the kids, and then they're looking at their phone, texting somebody else, or just completely off, right?
Right.
It
Right.
just doesn't. It's not good.
Yeah, it's amazing as great as technology is and how much we love it. but you're in a conversation with somebody and you start to respond, or if you have the Apple Watch and you're like,
Mhm.
clicking. I mean, it's so quick at how quick that connection can weaken and break. It's people don't even realize those little things add up to be actually pretty big things.
And I want to say I struggle with it too because
Oh
we're
yeah.
so busy. We're so busy, and that's why I think great leaders. And when I say leader, I mean we're all leaders. As everybody has the opportunity to be a leader. You don't have to be managing a team of 50. You could be a parent. You could be an individual contributor. Whatever it is, But it all starts with self awareness and being
Oof.
mindful and being present and kind of intentional. Like, okay, I'm gonna have a call with this person. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm going to put it somewhere else, and I'm going to really hone in on them. I struggle with it still sometimes, catching myself doing that, but I try to be better at it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I think as time goes by, it's going to be a much more trickier skill to keep managed because technology is just it's so ingrained with our life. So how do we do that more and more when it comes to our transparency as a leader? Oh my goodness, love the advice and the wisdom you've given us. What's the line between a healthy transparency and then, okay, we've crossed the line, like we've overshared, we've shared too much, or maybe shared too much of the wrong thing.
I think it's really a fine balance because but I do think you should share as much as you can.
Mm,
And I've had people come to me and say, "Well, Damon, what if I scare people and they freak out and they quit?" Uh, you know,
yep. Yep.
I honestly don't see that happening as much. I see kind of what you said, Jason, earlier is there's been times, whether it's COVID or even before, where Learnit was struggling. And I would be pretty transparent with where our numbers stood, where we were at. And a lot of times when you do this, you see people's stress level just go down, right?
Mm,
It just goes down. And then when people know where things stand, that's where great ideas bubble up because they're like, okay, I see what's going on. I trust these leaders because I feel like they're telling me the truth.
yep.
And then they go all in and they start coming up with ideas like, let's figure out how we can make this work together. Uh,
Wow.
it's really, I think what happens is if you're not as transparent and people find out that maybe you're not being honest, that's when people really go out there and start looking for other jobs. So I would say I would lean towards being as transparent as possible with people, but you got to do it in a way that is you do it with reality in mind, but also a positive outcome, that you're looking towards a positive outcome,
Yeah.
right? So like, here's where things are, here's the facts, and this isn't where we want it to be right now, okay? But I want your help, and we're going to work together, and here's how it's going to work out, and here's how we're going to make it through all this. And people rally on around that. One of my favorite leaders of all time is Winston Churchill.
Mm,
And I think that I don't think, I know that during World War II, especially during the Battle of Britain, he'd get up and he'd make these amazing speeches. But he was really honest with the people of England what was going on, right? He wasn't sugarcoating anything. But if you watch those legendary speeches, he ends them with, here's how we're going to make it through, and here's how we're going to make it through together. And that's how he got the whole country behind him and saved the world.
wow. I mean, you think about years ago, I had a leader in my life who was the director of collections for the Ford payment services. And so he was the person ultimately who led a team
People
who
love
had to
him.
call people when their payments were behind. What a job.
Yeah.
um, but he would say all the time, good communication's great. But the worst thing you can do is if you think the communication's bad, then don't communicate at all. He's like, as long as there's some type of ongoing communication where you're being honest and truthful. I thought about that as you were, talking about some of those kind of things and the transparency. Like we just have to continue, even if it's bad communication. It can build trust with people if they know, if they find it out from us, they're not finding it out from somebody else or some other way. And it's powerful.
And
What are some of the, especially as
all
you
goes back
lead?
to
Oh, go ahead.
trust.
Yeah.
I was just going to say it all goes back to trust.
Yeah.
It all goes back to trust. If your people trust you, then they're going to get behind you and they're going to give it 100%. If they don't trust you, and if you're inconsistent or you're not modeling the behavior that you want them to behave as, then you're going to have a really difficult time.
Yep. Yep. What are some of the little steps leaders can take, regardless of the role? Maybe they're, leading a team, maybe they're leading a division, maybe they run a small company, they strive to someday. What are some of those kind of small communication skills that, maybe when we think of them, we're like, that's not a big deal. But once they add up, I do that enough consistently, whatever those skills are, it just continues to build the trust. Are there any that you found over your career that are helpful for that?
Yeah, I don't know if you would consider these communication skills. I kind of do. But one thing is that we shouldn't be giving constructive feedback in a group, right? So calling somebody out in a group and saying,
Right.
"Hey, this is constructive feedback is super important, but um, don't do it in front of other people. Pull them aside, and when you give that constructive feedback, make it fact based,
It's
right?
huge.
Make it fact based and goal oriented, um, because otherwise it's just like, well, why is this person telling me? And it all comes down to these little things we're talking about building psychological safety, right?
Wow.
Being communicating in a way that people uh, that people feel like that you're approachable, and that they have that they can approach you and they can give you feedback
Yeah.
and not leaders. How are you going to grow if you can't get feedback? um
Right.
in Adam Grant's book, I think it's called Think Again. One of the techniques that he talks about there, which I love, is getting people to give you feedback. And one of the tricks that he did, like when I was writing my book, what I would do is I would write a chapter, and then I would find somebody that was a target audience. There's a guy on my team named Nick Silverthorne who's a aspiring leader, and I would say, hey Nick, can you read this chapter? And I would invite feedback. That's the word I was looking for. I would say, I don't really think this section is too good. What do you think? And what that does, Jason, is it opens the door for people to feel like, hey, I can actually give this guy feedback.
Wow.
And it's so much better than asking somebody for feedback. And trust me, 20 years ago, I would ask somebody for feedback. They'd give me feedback. I'd cross my arms. I'd hunch up, and I'd get upset. Right? That people, I get defensive. That
Yep.
doesn't work. As far as communication is concerned, it's both what you say verbally, and it's also the communication you present with your body language. And so those are little things. And one of the things that is not little, but it's important for all leaders to understand, is that as a leader, as a small business owner, you're always on stage. You're always on. So uh, if you come in and you look beat up and scared and depressed, then people are going to see that, right? So you have to be mindful of that. If you come across frustrated, people are going to see that. But if you come across positive, and it's hard to be positive, but you got to kind of check yourself going into it. And I mean, you got to be genuine, you got to be authentic. But at the end of the day, you're always on. People, as a leader, they're always looking at you like, how is Damon behaving today, right? What Damon are we going to get today? For bad leaders, right? That's what they look at,
Yep.
right? So those
Yep.
are those are my, if you want to tag them as communication, those are the things. Don't give constructive feedback. Invite. Don't give constructive feedback in a group setting. Invite feedback and be approachable are so
Mm,
important.
so good. I may disagree with you because, public humiliation always
Mhm.
seems to work. you know,
Okay.
no,
Yeah.
I don't disagree at
Hey,
all. I mean,
here's
absolutely.
one time. Here's a baseball story for you when it did work. Okay, I'll make it quick.
Yes.
We're playing Florida State back in a long time ago, And it was near the beginning of the season. We lost our first two games. Our coach lined us up. I tell the story in my book. Lined us up and just berated all of us, especially me. Berated us, and I went out and hit a 3-run home run in my first at bat. So that's an example of public humiliating somebody working, but that's also 30 years ago, and I don't think that that type of um, approach works too well anymore in the future.
Yeah, coaches, I mean, sport, baseball, football, those kind of coaches, they might get a little pass because, I mean, I've been on a couple practice fields for football, and whew, the the way they motivate is pretty strong. But it's
I'm okay
amazing.
with it, but I mean,
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
from a sports perspective, I want to thank all those coaches, um, because it gave you thicker skin.
Yeah.
But even that's changed because I've reconnected with some of my coaches over the years, and they said, "Well, you can't do that at all anymore." And I understand in some ways how bad it is, but I also understand that I think it's well. I just got done talking about not constructive feedback in a group setting, but I think there was a lot of good learning lessons over the years from that.
Sure, sure, absolutely. Well, it's so important to. I can't remember what leader said it, but in public, we praise, and in private, we're critics. We're able to say those things that it, it it might be a different story if it's a room of communicators and we're there for the reason to critique each other. Yeah, sure. Like, but in a team setting, you're so right on. Those things are, it's just so valuable and so important. Yeah, it is
One last
interesting.
thing I'll say about that for leaders out there, if you are going to critique people, one of the most important things that leaders can do, especially youth coaches and everything, is find the greatness in what these people have accomplished and make sure that you help them see and acknowledge the great accomplishments they've had,
Wow.
because that is so important. And I mean, I have so many memories and stories of these coaches who are hard on me, but they'd also pull me aside, Jason, and they'd tell me, make me feel great too,
Yep.
right? So you can't just, even in private, you can't just beat somebody up with constructive feedback, no matter how nice it is. That point out the great things people do, because a lot of times people don't see it in themselves. But if you're
Yep.
communicating to them, look what you've already accomplished, look what you've done, and then if it's somebody who's okay with it being visible to everybody else, share it with everybody else, communicate to everybody else, hey, look at this person, they've done this and that. I mean, it goes such a long way, and it really helps build people's confidence, which, if you're a coach or you're a leader or whatever it is you are, I mean, that, I think, is so, that is your responsibility to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's pretty powerful too when a coach or someone of that type of mentoring role. I learned the phrase years ago, I see in you. Ooh, when you pull someone aside and say, I see in you, the ability to lead this team someday, or I see in you, or when they call you to a higher level, like I I judge things a lot in my life, good, better, best, good, better, best.
Mhm.
I can't do best all the time. I may have had a horrible night with my kids throwing
Nobody
up,
can.
you know, and so, I figure out those areas, but when they could sit down with you and say, hey, you did good, but you got a whole lot more in you. Those are powerful, especially when they know you, they're helping you succeed. That is great stuff.
It is. I think it's a responsibility of a leader and a coach and a parent to extract that from people. And I like that, I see in you.
Yeah, that was good to learn. I think the other thing too, one of the things I teach in one of my training seminars is just one of the best communication skills you can learn is to stop asking boring questions, because so often questions can draw the genius out of people. And if we take a little bit of time and just learn the right questions to ask, whew, we can really, find out a whole lot and get to the heart of their story so much quicker. And I mean, when you touched on that, when you talk about just kind of checking in with people and spending that time, those kind of moments are so incredible. Is there any advice you would give leaders right now who, they're heading into a season where they don't quite know, where it's going to end? I know you've given us so much great advice throughout, but anything that's just percolated here towards the end of our conversation that you'd speak right into leaders?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of it. I think one of it is, um, to make sure that you realize that you're always on stage and people are looking to you.
So good.
I would like we talked about one new thing that we haven't spoken about, but which I want you to know is true is like we've all made it through our toughest days so far. So whatever it is,
Mm.
we could find a way to make it through, right? So and a lot of times we think things are a lot worse than they actually are. So let's not get too wrapped up in the negative. And I think it's important, leaders. It's important to be vulnerable, but when you be vulnerable with confidence, it's kind of,
Wow.
I mean, you know, tell people, hey, here's, I don't have all the answers. I need your help, but do it in a way with strength and invite them into helping you come up with, use the great talent that you hopefully have around you as a leader. And if you don't have great talent or you're a one man shop, one woman shop, go out and find, somebody like Jason or myself or some mentors who you could bounce ideas off of because people want to mentor and people want to help.
It's amazing. That's amazing. Wow. You have just opened up a vault here and given us some great wisdom.
I hope so.
My real mind is already thinking about, you've kind of given us like, a half dozen, if not more, of these really great pockets that are going to be awesome. Before I let you go, we're creating this online skills library where leaders can access it, filled with resources from all of our guests, their favorites. And so, if you haven't downloaded that yet, if you're listening, go to speakofpeople.com/skills library. But wondering for you, do you have a favorite speaker? Is there someone that you, every time you listen to them, they just hit all the marks, or you pass on their talk to somebody else, somebody that you'd recommend?
Well, there's so many famous ones out there that are great. I mean, I love Daniel Pink, um, but also one of the speakers who I actually know, who I think is awesome. I've seen him a bunch of times. His name's Arjun
Hmm.
Dinja, and he's such a passionate speaker around career development. He also does real estate investing, but also he's a former Taekwondo guy. That I love how he talks about the athletic skills. So yeah, sure. There's Brene Brown and Daniel Pink and all those famous people that everybody's heard of. But Arjun is somebody that I've seen speak 3 times recently, who's awesome.
Oh, I love that. If you're a
Dinga,
podcast,
Arjun Dinga.
love it. I got it.
Yeah.
If you're a podcast listener, is there a podcast that's a guilty pleasure or more on the development end that you just keep going back to? You love to recommend other people listen to it?
Well, I'm a huge Smartless fan. I mean, I watched, I listened to the Smartless with Jason Bateman and those other guys. I love that, and I actually think that there's a lot of, when they bring these guests on, like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Bradley Cooper or um, gosh, so many great people that they bring on. There's a lot of learning lessons for you there as well. I mean, just learning from their stories and some of the mistakes they've made. So, yeah, I'm a huge Smartless fan. I'm a big podcast guy. I actually on LinkedIn these days, one every Friday, I post an episode of something that I learned from a podcast. I also like the Knowledge Project. I think that's really good. So there's a lot of great podcasts.
Oh, I love that. What a great idea. And then lastly, is there a book that you're just like, hey, if you're a leader, if there's not one book, all the books, this is the one you got to make sure you read.
I would say, if we're going to stay in the communication theme, um, I think as a leader, storytelling is incredibly important. And the book is called Made to Stick by the Heath brothers.
Oh,
And what that book really helps you with, go out and get it. If for you listeners out there, it takes your ideas and helps you really tell these ideas through storytelling. I don't know, Jason, if you've ever read it, but it's a
oh yeah.
phenomenal book.
Absolutely. Wow. I love that. Okay. So where can our listeners find you? What's the best place to find you online, find out more information about what you do?
Yeah, I follow me on or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. And then also, please check out the Learn It All podcast. I love, um, we're about 70 episodes into it. I really, really enjoy it. Have some great leaders there. And then also, just our website's learnit.com. And my book, The Learn It All Leader Mindset, Tools, and Traits, is on Amazon or wherever you get your books.
I love it. And we'll put all that in the show notes. We'll put that in our Facebook group. and we'll get that out to our listeners. Damon, this was amazing. Like, thank you so much for being so transparent, for being so vulnerable, for sharing so much great wisdom. Oh, I did want to ask you: is there
Sure.
is there a favorite baseball player that's just like this is your guy?
Well, my favorite football player is Joe Montana. I mean,
Okay.
that's my all time legend favorite. Growing up, I had two favorite baseball players. I was a good left-handed hitter, so I always try to model my swing after Will Clark and George Brett. Those were my two guys. And if I had to throw a third one in, it was Don Mattingly. Will Clark, George Brett, Don Mattingly. Those were the three of my favorite hitters of all time.
Oh, I love it. That's fantastic. Again, thank you so much for this time, and appreciate all that you do.
Thank you. This was wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. Thank you for leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And thank you for every like and every comment. Every single time you cut and copy a link and send it to a coworker or a friend, it absolutely means the world, and it helps each other transform our communication skills. Lastly, don't forget about a great resource that's available to you: our communication skills library. At the end of every episode, we ask each guest their favorite speaker, their favorite podcast, their favorite book, and we've compiled all of those resources together to give you an amazing library to continue your growth and development. Thank you again for being a listener and for being a part of the Speak with People community.